The chronometer hummed, its rhythmic pulse a constant reminder of the delicate balance of time. A reassuring tremor against Dr. Julian Thorne's wrist, grounding him in the present moment. He gripped the temporal delimiter, feeling the weight of his decisions and the potential they held. Its cold metal a stark contrast to the sweat slicking his palm, a physical manifestation of his anxiety and anticipation. Years of planning, of defying the temporal accords, culminated in this moment. Every calculation, every risk had led him here. With a deep breath, he twisted the device. Reality rippled, bending to his will. Images flickered across his vision. A kaleidoscope of what was, what could be, what would now be his to command. The power was intoxicating. He'd pinpointed the temporal coordinates precisely. 19th century London before the Great Fire, before his lineage met its unfortunate end in the Inferno. This was his chance to rewrite history. This reality, ripe with possibility, awaited his touch. The future was malleable, and he was the sculptor. A smug grin spread across Thorne's face as he surveyed his handiwork. He had done it. He had changed the course of history. Newspapers trumpeted the survival of his ancestors, their factory now a thriving empire. His family's legacy was secure. His portrait, a testament to his ingenuity, hung above the grand fireplace in the opulent Thorne Manor. It was a symbol of his triumph. He'd sculpted history in his image, and it was exhilarating. The power to alter time was his greatest achievement. But even as he revelled in his triumph, a tremor shook the mansion. The ground beneath him seemed to protest his actions. A disquieting tremor, echoing with the chilling whisper of unintended consequences. The future was not as easily controlled as he had thought. London, once familiar in its Victorian splendour, now felt alien. The air, usually heavy with coal smoke, crackled with an unnatural static. Buildings stood at unsettling angles, as if reality itself were warping. Thorne's grin faltered. This wasn't right. He consulted the chronometer. The once precise numerals flickered erratically. Time, the very fabric he'd manipulated, was unraveling. He hadn't accounted for the butterfly effect, the chaotic ripples of even the smallest change. His meddling had thrown the delicate balance of time out of sync. Panic gnawed at the edges of his composure. The whispers grew louder, evolving into a cacophony of distorted voices, the cries of those lost in the temporal chaos he'd wrought. His triumph soured, replaced by a chilling realization. He wasn't a sculptor of history, but a vandal defacing a masterpiece. He had to fix this, before the cracks in time widened enough to swallow him whole. Sleep, when it came, offered no respite. Nightmares plagued him. Fragmented visions of a world lost to his ambition. He saw London swallowed by an inferno of temporal energy, the Thames running red with the blood of misplaced timelines. He saw his own face, contorted in a silent scream, fading into nothingness. The whispers were louder now, laced with an accusing chill. They spoke of oblivion, of the void that awaited those who dared to tamper with the sacred flow of time. He was no longer just risking the erasure of his lineage, but the very essence of his being. Waking brought no comfort. The chronometer, once a symbol of his mastery, now mocked him with its erratic display. Time was slipping away, each tick a precious grain of sand disappearing into the abyss. He had to act, and act fast, before the whispers of oblivion became a deafening roar. The temporal delimiter, once a tool of creation, now felt heavy in his hand. It was no longer just an instrument, it had become a symbol of his greatest failure and his deepest regret. A grim reminder of his folly. He understood now the weight of what he carried, not just the burden of his own existence, but the delicate balance of countless lives. His arrogance had blinded him to the intricate tapestry of time, a web so delicate that even the slightest touch could cause ripples of unimaginable consequence, the interconnected threads of cause and effect. He delved into his calculations, his notes a chaotic jumble reflecting the state of his mind. The equations swam before his eyes, each line a condemnation of his recklessness. He had to isolate the point of divergence, the exact moment where his actions had set off a chain reaction, the precise moment his interference had tipped the scales. But time was a slippery beast, its secrets guarded jealously. Each failed attempt, each dead end, chipped away at his resolve. The whispers were ever present, a constant reminder of the stakes involved. A chorus of despair urging him to surrender to the encroaching void. But beneath the fear, a flicker of determination ignited. He wouldn't be remembered as a destroyer. He would fight for his redemption, for the chance to make things right, for the chance to stitch the fabric of time back together. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but the weight of ages had taught him one invaluable lesson: perseverance. Section 5. A desperate gamble. The solution, when it finally presented itself, was as audacious as it was terrifying. He couldn't simply undo his actions. The temporal ripples were too widespread. He had to create a counter-disturbance, a controlled temporal anomaly to neutralize his initial interference. It was a gamble, a desperate throw of the dice against the relentless march of time. Success meant restoring balance, a chance to atone for his sins. Failure meant utter annihilation, his existence wiped clean from the annals of history. He input the revised coordinates, his hand trembling with the weight of his decision. The temporal delimiter hummed, its energy core glowing with an ominous intensity. He took a deep breath, steeling his nerves. This was it, a leap of faith into the unknown. He activated the device. The world dissolved into a blinding white light. Time ceased to exist, replaced by an echoing void where past, present, and future swirled together in a chaotic maelstrom. He felt himself unraveling, his consciousness scattered across the temporal spectrum. Visions bombarded him, fleeting glimpses of his childhood, his triumphs, his failures. Each memory a poignant reminder of the life he was fighting to reclaim. He clung to these echoes, these fading fragments of his identity, as the void threatened to consume him whole. He heard whispers, but they were different now. No longer chilling pronouncements of doom, but echoes of hope. Faint whispers of a future struggling to be born. Was it working? Was he rewriting his fate, or was this the final cruel trick of a collapsing timeline? The light began to fade. The chaotic symphony of the void replaced by a familiar silence. He was back in his workshop, the temporal delimiter deactivated on his workbench. Had it worked? Had he succeeded in repairing the damage he'd wrought? He rushed to the window, his heart pounding against his ribs. London, bathed in the soft glow of dawn, looked normal. The unsettling angles were gone. The air no longer crackled with static. He checked his chronometer. The numerals glowed steadily, the rhythmic ticking a soothing counterpoint to the frantic beating of his heart. He sank to his knees. Overcome with relief, he'd won. But the victory felt hollow, the weight of his actions, the lives he'd endangered, the very fabric of time he'd nearly shredded, pressed down on him. He'd stared into the abyss, and the abyss had stared back. And the temporal delimiter lay on the workbench, its power dormant, yet still a potent reminder of the seductive allure of manipulating time. He could continue, refine his methods, become a true master of time. The possibilities were endless and utterly terrifying, but he'd seen the consequences, felt the icy breath of oblivion on his neck. He'd danced with the devil of his own ambition and barely escaped with his life. The true cost of altering time, he realized, was far too great a price to pay. He made his choice. With a heavy heart, he dismantled the temporal delimiter, scattering its components. He swore off any further meddling with time, vowing to use his knowledge for good to ensure that no one else repeated his mistakes. The future was unwritten, the path ahead uncertain, but one thing was clear: his days of playing God were over. He became a silent guardian, a watcher in the shadows, unseen and unheard by those he protected, ensuring the sanctity of the timeline. He dedicated his life to studying history, not altering it, immersing himself in the annals of time, learning from the mistakes of the past to guide a better future. Sometimes, late at night, he would see a fleeting glimpse of a world reshaped by his hand, a vision of what could have been, a ghostly echo of the path not taken, a pang of regret. A whisper of what might have been would tug at his heart, reminding him of the choices he had made. But he would remind himself of the chaos, the devastation he had caused, and the fragile beauty of the timeline he had sworn to protect. He had learned his lesson, a lesson paid for in the currency of time and consequence, a lesson etched in the very fabric of his being. Time, once his playground, was now his responsibility, a burden and a gift intertwined. The rogue time-traveler had found redemption, not in rewriting history, but in safeguarding its delicate dance. The future remained unwritten, a canvas of infinite possibilities. But for the first time in a long time, Dr. Julian Thorne faced it with hope, not ambition. He had come to understand that true power lay not in changing the past, but in protecting the future.